Kayla Reeves stepped off the elevator and into the sleek, polished lobby of AgriCore Technologies. The space gleamed with glass and chrome, buzzing with high-powered professionals in suits and heels. Kayla, in her carefully ironed second-hand blazer and clean jeans, clutched her worn leather notebook and tried to steady her nerves. She had grown up in Nebraska, rising with the sun to tend to livestock and manage the land with her father. They didn't have much, but what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in grit. Today, she wasn't here to prove anything to herself. She already knew what she could do. She was here to prove it to a room full of people who had never set foot in a cornfield. The receptionist greeted her with a polite but curious glance, likely wondering why someone with calloused hands and dusty boots was walking into a Fortune 500 interview. Still, Kayla remained calm. She taught herself coding late at night using YouTube videos and free online courses. She'd built a working predictive irrigation model that had saved her family's farm from drought conditions last year. Now she was here to apply for a position in AgriCore's Rural Innovation Division, a team responsible for solving the very challenges she'd faced her whole life. After a short wait, an assistant escorted her into the boardroom. It was vast, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Inside sat a row of executives in sharp suits, including Jeffrey Dalton, the CEO himself. He glanced at her resume, then at her clothes, then leaned back in his chair. "You're Kayla Reeves," he said, a trace of amusement in his voice. "You built this irrigation model on a farm?" "Yes, sir," she said with a steady tone. "Based on real field data, using local climate variation inputs. I taught myself after our commercial system failed us 2 years ago." Jeffrey smirked. "You've never worked in a tech company, have you?" "No," she replied, "but I've worked the land every day since I was old enough to carry a feed bucket. I know the problems you're trying to solve, because I've lived them." There was a pause. Some of the executives exchanged glances. One of them coughed under his breath. Another looked down at her resume with disinterest. Jeffrey tapped a pen against his notepad and leaned forward. "Tell you what," he said. "Why don't you show us this so-called model?" Without a word, Kayla opened her notebook and slid it across the table. The pages were covered in neatly drawn diagrams, code logic, and hand-labeled graphs. At first, the room was silent. Then one of the engineers furrowed his brow and leaned in. "Wait," he muttered, "is this a dynamic optimization loop based on variable terrain mapping?" Kayla nodded. "Yes, most commercial systems treat flat fields the same, but our land isn't flat. It slopes, curves, and floods in the southern corner. My model adjusts based on microterrain and recent rainfall." Now every eye in the room was on her. Jeffrey looked genuinely surprised. "You did this on your own?" "Yes, and I'd be happy to walk you through how it works." He pushed his chair back slightly and crossed his arms, studying her. The smirk was gone. Kayla didn't need to guess what he was thinking. He had assumed she was just a farm girl, someone they invited out of courtesy or amusement. But now she had the room's full attention, and she wasn't even finished yet. Kayla stood at the head of the boardroom, marker in hand, facing a wall-sized whiteboard that reflected the early afternoon sun. Behind her, the executives remained seated, most still processing what they had just seen in her notebook. One engineer tapped away on a tablet, cross-checking her model with internal test data. Kayla began to draw her system architecture step by step, explaining how she used free satellite imaging and local rainfall sensors to build a responsive water management grid. Her voice was steady, her words precise. No one interrupted. As she moved to the side, she pulled out a USB drive from her pocket. "This has the actual data logs from the last growing season. You'll see that during July, my system reduced water usage by 38% while maintaining crop yield." One of the senior analysts plugged it into the central console, and soon the boardroom screen lit up with charts, time-lapse images, and side-by-side comparisons. Everything, Kayla claimed, was backed by clean, organized evidence. Jeffrey Dalton stood slowly and walked over to the screen, staring at the numbers in silence. "You ran this without any external funding?" he finally asked. "Yes, I couldn't afford to fail," Kayla replied. We had one more dry year left before we would have had to sell the land. I had to find a solution that didn't require money, just time, data, and stubbornness. A younger executive near the corner leaned toward the CEO. Sir, this fills every gap we've been struggling with in our pilot program. Jeffrey didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Kayla. And what do you want, Miss Reeves? Kayla hesitated. I didn't come here for a job title. I came because farmers like mine don't get second chances. If I can make your systems work for them, really work, then I want to be in that room. I want a seat at the table where those decisions are made. The CEO nodded, thoughtful now. You're not afraid to tell a room full of executives that their approach is wrong? Kayla met his gaze. I've spent most of my life listening to people who never touch soil telling us how to farm. I'm done staying quiet. There was a long pause. Then Jeffrey extended his hand. Congratulations. You're now the lead developer on our rural intelligence project. And yes, you'll have a seat at that table. She shook his hand firmly. One of the engineers clapped softly. Another executive stood and approached her with a notepad, already asking questions about terrain layering. The room had shifted. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She was the expert. As she gathered her things, Jeffrey added, One condition. We'll need you to relocate to the city. Kayla smiled. I'll spend half the year here, but harvest season I go home, non-negotiable. A few people chuckled, but the respect was real now. She walked out of the room not just with a job, but with her head high, knowing that she had redefined the way they saw rural intelligence. The farmer's daughter they'd once underestimated had not just earned their respect, she'd forced them to change. And for the first time, as she stepped into the elevator, she realized that maybe the boardroom wasn't so different from the field. Both just needed someone who knew how to read the weather, trust their instincts, and show up, boots dusty, heart steady, and ready to lead.